And welcome once again to Strange Planet. Thanks for joining us. All right, we are going to take a look at a little bit of the year that was 2022 in UFO disclosure and a little bit of the year ahead. What lies ahead in 2023 vis-a-vis UFO disclosure? And to help us along in this regard, a great friend of the podcast, Victor Vigiani, the Executive Director of Z-Land Communications and Z-Land News Network. Victor's research and analysis of anomalous aerial phenomenon spans over 30 years. His experience involves UFO sightings, report investigation, counseling work with individuals reporting anomalous experiences, presentations, and journalism in the field of ETI disclosure issues. Victor, welcome again. How are you?
I'm just fine, and thanks for having me on the show, Richard. Really appreciate it. It's been quite a year.
I'll say. So we were supposed to get this annual report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, I believe the end of October, Halloween, October the 31st. It didn't arrive. It didn't arrive in November. It didn't arrive in December. It has just recently, within the last couple of days, arrived, November, December, 2.5 months late.
Mhm.
And it's all of 11 pages, 4 of which are appendices or appendix. I'm not sure. Appendices, is that the plural of
Appendices, that's the right word. Yep.
You got to be careful. He's a retired school principal.
I'll correct you when I need to. Okay.
Thank you. I need
It's
it.
just in my nature.
So, I mean, what do you make of that? We waited all this time and it's like 8 pages, and I read most of it. There's not a lot of meat on them bones. Disappointed?
Well, with the report itself, yeah, and we can really get into why I'm disappointed with it in so many ways. And it's not just me. It's I've been following a lot of sources over the past, I'd say, well, 2 months to kind of figure out exactly why is this thing being sort of held up in abeyance. Is there something really, really important by legislative demand? That I think our listeners need to understand that this is something that was required for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to do. Now, as you probably know that sometimes in government and as things have gone in the United States, the requirements and laws and everything have gone by the wayside, and people ignore things just left, right, and center. So it wasn't a real surprise to me that this was delayed. The specific reasons why it was delayed, I can't even speculate on that. I can give you some reasons why I think it might be the case, but the fact of the matter is, dragging of the feet is something that this whole situation has been characterized by for so long, not just with respect to the legislation, but what has come down with the responsibilities of some of these agencies, the alphabet agencies. They've literally just dragged their feet. So I think that's basically one of the reasons why. And then getting their act together with all of these alphabet agencies that they created for themselves after the release of information in 2017. It's taken that long for it to come to this point. And they're coordinating something like 20 organizations or agencies, I should say. And that kind of coordination possibly could be one of the reasons why this has been delayed. But once again, that's just speculation. And
All right. So the report includes, well, they mention 366 newly identified reports informed by a multi-agency process, judged more than half as exhibiting unremarkable characteristics. And then they go on to say, and they're talking about UAPs here,
right.
unidentified aerial phenomenon events.
Mm-hmm.
26 characterized as unmanned aircraft systems, i.e. drones. 163 characterized as balloons or balloon-like entities, and 6 attributed to clutter, which leads to 171 uncharacterized and unattributed UAP reports that they say require further analysis. Just give me your general thoughts on this breakdown.
Well, the way they've characterized all of this information is a function of the kinds of techniques or methods or analysis that they've used or they've drawn from agencies like the United States Air Force, radar installations, and all of those kind of technical methodologies to analyze things. And in addition to some of the things that you mentioned, if you look closely at some of the verbiage, they also include the words plastic bags down at the bottom. So, I mean, that doesn't lend a whole lot of credibility as to what they're looking at here. I think what they've done is, and this is something that I think really leads to um, uh, a large amount of doubt as to why and what they've actually done. And when you talk about 510 reports since, the last report that they made, and some of them are identified and some of them are not. I mean, I don't want to go into all the numbers, but let's dwell on that fact for a second and what they've managed to do. And this is one of the things that's been highly criticized by a number of people with respect to this report is they've listed or talked about or identified or analyzed 510 since 4 or 5 years ago. Okay. And even further back than that, maybe 10 years ago. The fact of the matter is, Richard, they have cataloged just alone, the United States Air Force have cataloged, and there's a report that states this, over 12,000 UFO reports. Okay, 12,000 of them. And this report is totally silent on that. Now, that's only one level of criticism that's been sort of leveled at this agency and this report. If you look at the number of reports just in the United States alone, reported by the National UFO Reporting Center, Peter Davenport, and with all the credibility that he's managed to accrue over the years, we're looking at 80,000 reports that NUFORC has accumulated. Now, of course, the United States government has no interest in believing one way or another, or accounting for, or even analyzing any of those 80,000. But the fact that they've only looked at 510 reports really shows that they're looking through a pinhole, Richard. They're looking through a pinhole at these sightings and looking at them from a very, very limited point of view. So that's one of the major criticisms of this report. They're being very myopic about what they're looking at, how they're looking at it, and the extent to which they're going back further in history to account for all of the pilot sightings, the FAA encounters, the air traffic controller encounters. What the Navy has reported alone is sufficient for them to do much, much more than what they've done. So they're being very, very lax in what they're doing, how they're looking at it, and extremely myopic in their overall assessment of the things that they're looking at. And we can only get into the other aspects of it with respect to, what these things might be and what this agency is attributing to all of these things, like plastic bags or drones or something from China. That's another whole question altogether.
Right. Yeah. It's basically swamp gas 2.0, I guess.
Right.
And what do we or what do you think they will do with this remaining 171? They call them uncharacterized and unattributed UAP reports that require further analysis. Are we likely to see any further analysis on that 171?
Well, by the very fact that this thing is in two parts, two disclosure parts. First of all, there's a classified version, which we probably won't see. Now, what that classified version includes, there's no telling. There's no way of knowing that, because it is indeed classified. And that's another sort of overall critique about this. Why is it being classified? The unclassified version of all of this just talks about numbers, who's responsible for looking at them, what they might attribute it to, the number of agencies that they go to try to investigate all of this stuff. That sort of analysis is very limited in scope. So they don't include any singular assessment of even a summary of an individual report. Let's suppose, for example, they took a report of a UAP over Wisconsin in, March of 2018, for example, whatever that might be. There is no identification of that specific incident. Okay, that if it in fact occurred, there's no analysis of any incident at all. All they do is throw numbers at us. Now, that may change in the classified version. There may be images there may be videos there, but in the unclassified version, there's nothing there. So in essence, what they've done, in answer to your question, Richard, what they've done is they've just thrown a bunch of numbers at us and a bunch of words that says, here's what we looked at, here's the numbers, and that's it. There's no accounting as to what this other number that you just mentioned might be. There's no distillation. There's no breakdown of the kinds of incidents that were there. Who saw it? Was it a pilot? Was it an air traffic controller? Was it a commercial pilot? Was it there's no definition as to who saw these things, what they saw, and any characterization. The only thing they really mention is some of the movement character. They call them unusual maneuvering characteristics. That's as far as they go. They don't talk about any of the propulsion systems that they see or don't see. They don't see anything about the configuration of these units or these craft. So it really is sort of a blitz of jargon, vexing jargon. That's the way I put it. And we're asked to assimilate that information and try to distill it. Now, in breaking off from that line of reasoning, in the general public, to the average man on the street, this report might be very interesting. Oh my goodness, 510 reports, and to someone who knows nothing about this issue or very little about it, it all sounds like the government's being kind of upfront. Here's all this information. To the uninitiated, that might be, in fact, be the case. But to someone like myself or any of the members of the UFO research community, the advocacy groups, the researchers, the authors, the lawyers, and even people in pilots in the Navy, they got to be looking at this and saying, "My goodness, there's nothing here." It's just sort of, as I call it, vexing jargon. And so there's two ways of looking at this. I think what they've done is they put forward this report in the public domain to convince the public, the uninitiated public, to say, we're doing something about this.
Mm-hmm.
But the UFO research community said, come on, guys, let's be real. You don't expect us to believe this jargon that you're throwing at us? Are you being facetious? Are you, what's the purpose of all? You know what's going on here as well as we do. So what's the nature of this report? And the thing too is they're going to be doing this from now until 2026, a report, every year. So expect more of this. How much more deeply they get into it is anybody's guess. And my interpretation of it, Richard, is they're not going to go much deeper than they already have. So, I mean, then we can get into the whole argument of what they are, where they're from, and what the pilots are seeing. And we can maybe even get into things like the intercontinental ballistic missile shutdowns. There's no mention of that at all. That should be one of the reports for sure. It has to be. It happened at least 7 times at different nuclear installations, and they're absolutely silent on those. And they should be, in fact, part of the report. Now, maybe it's in the classified version. I don't know.
Well, who gets to see who will be privy to the classified report? Will it be someone on the Senate Intelligence Committee or a House Intelligence Committee? Who will see the classified report?
It's going to be one of those on the legislative side. Yeah, on the legislative side, it'll be people like the Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, any one of those committees in Congress or the Senate. They may be able to get copies of the classified version. Now, how they make that public, whether there's a non-disclosure caveat to what they can say about this, I don't know. But I think that on the congressional or the legislative side, I think there will be committees that will be able to access this information. And I think one of the congressmen, Adam Schiff, I think, has made a statement thanking the Director of National Intelligence for publishing this report. Now, whether that was tongue in cheek by him and saying thank you for your openness, but there's much more to it, I don't know. But someone like him may have access to the classified version.
So the ODNI annual, which is in 2 parts, as you say, unclassified and classified, was that not part of the appropriations bill for the Pentagon? In other words, this was the appropriations, the budget for the Pentagon was
right.
It was a condition that they produce this annual report.
A requirement, yeah.
Can they not say at some point, you got to do better? I mean, can they not amend the appropriations bill and say this is not what we're asking for?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. What I've learned in the last, I say, year and a half about how government works, I've learned it through Canadian sources and asking some of the MPs and their staff members as to how we proceed with trying to find out what's going on in our skies up here in Canada. And what I've been told, and it will be replicated in the States too, to a much higher degree, is that you move slowly and you stay in your lane. You move slowly and you stay in your lane. And each department, each MP, you don't vary it. You don't start asking questions that are unanswerable, that aren't in your own lane. And I think that's the nexus of what's going on here with the demand that I guess that requirement, that legislative requirement is they can't say, well, come on, give us more. It's in the legislation, and how they got that legislation, how Marco Rubio and Mark Warner got that into the legislation to begin with is a mystery to a lot of people. They somehow got that stuff in, and there's been no definitive answer as to why and how they got that language into that congressional piece of legislation, along with Gillibrand's amendments and with the congressional input by I believe his name was Ruben Gallego. Okay, so there's several congressional people and senators that were involved in developing the language, but they just said we want to know more about UAP. Now, how they would have characterized, how they analyze what they know, that's another question. So maybe they should have said something more like, okay, fine, go beyond China, go beyond Russia, go beyond weather balloons. We want to know more about the energy systems that but that wasn't in the legislation. So they are in fact confined by what they said in that act, and that's their own fault, basically. Okay, so what they might have to do is redraft that legislation to make the demands that you just stated. We want to know more. It's insufficient. Now that could come down to being, a memo to the Office of the National Director of Intelligence saying, listen, stop fudging things. We want to know more. Or they can put it in legislation to demand much more specific information.
It's a little bit like drafting a FOIA, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Be very specific because they'll stick to the letter
exactly.
of the FOIA request. They won't give you a scintilla more than what you asked for.
Exactly. No, I went through that with respect to some of the NORAD stuff that I asked for. Oh, I'm thinking, no, gosh, it's almost 12 years ago now, Richard. It took me 5 times, 5 requests to the Access to Information Act here in Canada to get my language right. The first time we have nothing. We don't have anything. So I narrowed it down further. So I didn't use the term UFO. I used the term UFOs to begin with, and they said we have nothing on UFOs. So I said, okay, well, what's the terminal? I finally, whittled it down to unknown targets or non-correlated targets. As soon as I used that language, bang, it all came open. So that's what I meant about staying in your lane. In your lane, if you don't ask the right questions, or if you don't pursue it in a certain way, they just blow you off. And I think that's what's happening with this report. And the vexation of the jargon that's in there. And I've read that thing 3 times now, Richard, and it just astounds me what their focus is. Their focus is on the weather balloons, plastic bags, and Russia and China, and or aerial threats to the navigation of airplanes. It's all just a threat scenario, and that's the way they interpret things. That's the way it's in their DNA to do that. That's I guess that's the crux of the matter. In their DNA, there is no room for them to expound upon or even entertain the possibility of an off-world civilization being responsible. It's just not in their DNA, or another way of saying it's not in their lane to say anything about that. Now, will they do that before 2026? They just might. Once they exhaust all these other possibilities, they're going to have to come up with some language to say, we don't know what it is. It's not Russia, it's not China. What else is it? And then you're just left with dead silence. So somebody's got to come up with language to describe what else it might be.
Up here in Canada, we would say they can only rag the puck for so long. We'll take a time out. Victor Vigiani stays with us.
Every new season, we find a reason to improve our lives and our health.
And C60 Evo organic edible oils deliver noticeable benefits quickly. A spoonful in the morning delivers energy and endurance all day long, and I sleep deeper and wake up feeling refreshed because C60 ESS60 works. Carbon 60 received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1996 when it was used for industrial applications. C60 Evo's ESS60 is a breakthrough technology upgrading C60 to be safe for human and pet consumption. ESS60 has been called a miracle molecule because of the physical and mental benefits people are enjoying. Their lab has a proven track record of 31 years and thousands of happy customers across the world, just like me. So treat yourself, your friends, and your family to C60 Evo and use my link, EVRS, to get 10% off your first order. Again, my link, EVRS, to get 10% off your first order. Victor Vigiani stays with us, Executive Director of Zealand News Network and Zealand Communications. And let's move on to AARO. There's a lot of, there's so many acronyms floating
The
around.
acronyms, yeah.
The ODNI report, which we just talked about, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And then there was the formation of the DOD's All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Who came up with that one?
Well, that came out of I guess some people are saying the mistake that the Pentagon made by instituting what they call the UAP UAP to the United, pardon me, the UFO Aerial Phenomena Task Force. Okay, the Pentagon instituted that, and what happened was that particular agency that the Pentagon instituted had no oversight, had no extended responsibilities or capabilities to go and make inquiries to at least the 20 agencies that I mentioned. I'm talking the National Reconnaissance Organization, the CIA, the FBI. They had no authority at the time to go to these other agencies to either ask for them, to assist them in analyzing them, these reports. They had no capacity or requirement to demand that any of these agencies supply what they have to give back to the task force. So what they did, what the Director of National Intelligence did, is they reconstructed that or renamed it or replaced it with the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Okay, and it's headed by a Dr. Kirkpatrick. Okay, Kirkpatrick. Okay, and I've yet to find out what kind of staff this guy has. Okay, so he's a very well-known scientist. I don't know if he has a full staff or if it's just a single show, a one-man show. So that office has been developed, and it has wide-ranging, as you probably have read in the report. It has wide-ranging, I guess, capabilities to ask or to interact with all of the agencies, the Defense Department, with the Pentagon, with the FBI, with the National Reconnaissance, the Armed Services Committee, all of these things. So this particular committee was drummed up to do all of this. Now, how effective they are, and I think this all goes back to, as far as I'm concerned, as to what the staffing level is at this agency and how effective it can be with the number of staff that can do all of the research. I just don't know the answer to that question. I listened to an interview that Daniel Sheehan gave 2 weeks ago, and he's of the opinion that this agency, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, is a one-man show. So how, if in fact Daniel is correct, how effective can a one-man show be in coordinating all of these events? He must have some sort of staff. So that's another unknown that we have. And the limited language that they have, the limited scope of the investigation, I think reflects the fact that this guy could be on his own. And once again, I'm just speculating. But if he had a staff of a dozen people, it might be a little bit more effective in releasing an unclassified version with a little bit, as you said earlier in the program, a little bit more meat on the bones. But right now, it may reflect the fact that this fellow is on his own and he's just doing his own thing, and it's just they're throwing us a bone with no meat on it.
What happens to all of the testimony and all of the documents and all the evidence that's gathered by the AARO, does that find its way into the ODNI annual, either unclassified or classified? Is it a separate entity? Are they mandated to bring this before either the House or some legislative body?
Well, that would all depend, and this goes back to the legislative part of all of that. That all depends on the nature of the classified and unclassified version. Okay, so if we back up a bit and we say to ourselves, well, let's look at the classified version and what that has. Okay, and if that classified version of what they've just been given, or other reports that may be associated that we don't know about, or it could be videos, it could be actual pilot testimony. If that information in a classified version is presented in a committee format, that committee can make a decision whether to classify or declassify this information. From what I understand, it's not once it's given to these congressional committees, if it is in fact given the classified version, it is not in the purview, from the way I understand, of the Office of the National Director of Intelligence to actually classify or declassify it. The committee can. That's the way I understand things. So if they're supplied with a classified version that gives us a lot more information, then I think that kind of declassification process can become a public, and they can begin releasing all kinds of information about what the sightings are, who sighted them, what the mechanics of these UFOs or UAP might be, the flight characteristics, and some speculation, or at least statement that, hey, folks, this is not our stuff, and it doesn't belong to China, and it doesn't belong to Russia or any other, foreign agency. Then we get into the question of, well, if it's not from there, where's it from? That's the big turning point here.
Well, that brings us to Robert Salas, who was a witness to the UFO incursion over a nuclear missile site, Malmstrom Air Force Base in North Dakota, North or South Dakota, 1967. I think it's North Dakota, right?
Yep.
He's been summoned. Well, he's been contacted to
Right.
provide
That's
testimony.
right.
I don't. Summoned is a legal term. I don't know that he's
Right.
been
Yeah.
summoned or subpoenaed or anything like that.
Mhm.
Well, that begs the question. I mean,
Yeah.
so Robert Salas has been asked to speak to the All Domain Anomalous Resolution Office.
Mhm.
Would he have been subpoenaed or summoned? Would he be under oath?
I would imagine that if you're called before this committee, it depends on whether or not this particular committee, the AARO committee, has subpoena power. Uh, my sense right now is this committee probably does not have subpoena power, which is probably okay as far as Robert is concerned.
Yeah, you don't need to subpoena. They're more than willing to tell you
You
everything.
bet.
You don't need, but it would for those people that would say, well, he could be making it up. You could say, well, yes, but he's not going to perjure himself.
That's right, exactly. And if the committee has, if this particular resolution office has that kind of let's use the word authority, then whatever Robert Salas testifies to could be considered as sort of oath worthy. If he could not come before this group and make things up, or be held liable if he did make things up. Now, if he were to be called or subpoenaed by a committee, by the Armed Services Committee, or the Congressional Intelligence Committee, or any one of the Senate committees, that would be in fact an oath-bearing situation where he would be entering into telling the truth under subpoena. So there's a double-edged sword there. No, so if he does come before this group, the AARO, it would probably be just informational. And if any other, launch commander were to come forward about their, I mean, there was at least 6 or 7 other similar incidents to Robert's incident with shutting down the missiles. Those all would be called forward and just be informational in nature. And then this committee would have to decide whether or not to move forward with this information and make it part of the classified or the declassified part of their next report. And that will be very interesting. I'm really glad you've mentioned that, because if Robert does come forward and he does give his testimony, and other ICBM launch commanders give their testimony about their encounters, the real authentic encounters, and go further into it in terms of examination of what happened after these encounters, which is just as important as the actual incident itself, they would have to decide whether or not to make this public. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the Pentagon knows about these shutdowns. In fact, there's no doubt in my mind that the Pentagon, the Defense Department, knows about these encounters. I mean, why would we think that shutting down of 12 missiles at just one site would be something that would slip by the Pentagon, go unnoticed by the Department of Defense? That is impossible to even fabricate in your own mind to think about, to postulate. So they do know about this, and by the way, your listeners should know that Robert Salas did testify and provide evidence at the Brazilian Senate hearings back in October. So it's been very interesting to see how Robert has come forward with all this information, and his level of credibility is impeccable.
All right, another time out. Victor Vigiani, Zealand News Network, Zealand Communications. Stay with us.
November reminds us to be thankful and focused on boosting our radiant health before winter. And I use a potent remedy that's improved the quality of my life and deepened my sleep as well. I take C60 Evo olive oil every morning, and I have a lot more energy and mental focus all day long. My workouts are easier, and I have a lot more endurance. If you're into competitive sports, this is a game changer. Health is our greatest wealth, and Pura C60 ESS60 really works. ESS60 is a breakthrough technology delivering the carbon-60 miracle molecule for humans and pets. Check out the C60 Evo holiday gift collections for everyone on your list. They make amazing skin, lip, and hair repair serum that deliver noticeable results quickly. C60 Evo's lab has an impressive track record of 31 years and, of course, my personal recommendation. You deserve the best remedies on earth, and so do those you love. Buy direct from the lab and upgrade your life today. Use my code EVRS to save 10% off your first order. Again, my code EVRS and save 10% off your first order.
Victor Vigiani, Executive Director of Zealand News Network and Zealand Communications. And how do we get all of your press releases? How do we read them?
Well, just Google Zealand Communications .blogspot.com, and you'll get my latest release. The latest one is, in fact, about Robert Salas and or how he's been called forward to this committee. So that's the latest one. But all the other ones over the past, I guess, 8 or 9 years, they're all right there.
You mentioned Robert Salas being asked to testify before the AARO, that's the All Domain Anomalous Resolution Office, and talk about or investigate these ICBM missile shutdowns over, in places like Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967, but there are others.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those of us, who follow this, or anyone who just cares to go to Amazon and buy, Robert Hastings' book, and this is all public knowledge now anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how are they going to, unless there's something Salas is holding back that he hasn't, told the rest of us, how could this be deemed classified at any point?
Well, it's a lot like much of what the United States has gone through over the years. When you bring forward information about something that's happened within the United States government, and then the media finds out about it, or you have a whistleblower announce the information, like what happened in Watergate. It's a very similar kind of situation. When all of the information about Watergate came forward, it was a matter of, I suppose, the way the Washington Post decided to come forward with the information, and how the publishers and ownership of the Washington Post decided with, I guess, the people that wrote all of the information about it.
Oh, Woodward and Bernstein.
Right, yeah, Woodward and Bernstein. When they decided to say, okay, fine, we've got to make a statement, very similar to the Pentagon Papers, okay? But when Woodward and Bernstein were given the authorization to dig deeper into all of this, that's when the United States government, and particularly the White House, figured, okay, they've got us now. There's so much information. So they went into cover-up mode. And the more the media hacked away at the information, the more they found out, the more they, asked people within the White House to come forward. And as soon as the media began to really, first of all, present the information as credible, number one, as absolutely credible, and their evidence was impeccable, it led to the construction of the hearings, the Watergate hearings. Now, the Watergate hearings, and this is just my own opinion, may not have happened unless Woodward and Bernstein did what they did. So to go back to what you were saying is, okay, fine, we've got these missile shutdown things, and Robert Salas is making the statements about it, and the other 6 or 7 launch commanders and their affidavits, their signed affidavits that have them. I've got them on my website, that they went through very similar, if not exactly the same situations with multiple missiles being shut down. They can testify, before any kind of committee. That's fine. But if they do not do something to push this whole ICBM shutdown situation into the media, and if the media gets a hold of it and says, hang on a second, folks, and imagine the same thing happening. Washington Post says, holy smoke, 12 missiles shut down? National security issue, the bells are going to go off, bells and whistles are going to go off like crazy. Do you mean that the United States Pentagon and Defense Department hasn't told us that 12 of our missiles were shut down by some sort of anomalous craft? And then you go on and on from that. That, in my opinion, is how it's going to come forward. And it will balance Robert Salas's testimony, along with any of the other ICBM launch commanders, balance their testimony along with how the media is going to really, really harp on this issue and make it a major issue. I don't think there's any other issue that can be stronger and more convincing. You can talk about the videos that came out in 2017 with the New York Times. They were good, but they were not nearly as convincing as shutting down 12 missiles at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. It happened, and you know why you can prove that? Boeing was asked to come forward and do a thorough investigation of why these missiles were shut down, and Boeing had no answers. And they did the same thing at the other nuclear installations. And all of the launch commanders, as far as I know, and definitely Robert Salas, were told point blank, you will not talk about this information. So there's that kind of pressure built on how Robert may give his testimony, and B, how the media speculatively would pick up on the fact that Robert was there. He was a witness to the incident, along with all these other launch commanders. That, to me, is going to be a tipping point as to how the media might be instrumental in getting this information out. Because I don't think Congress can do that just yet. And I don't think this resolution office, is going to willingly come forward with that kind of information. I just don't think. They may even know about it already. I'm convinced they might be, but they're just sort of sitting on the information. But once again, that's just my opinion and speculation about what they know.
That was my next question, is as to whether, that the staff, or whether it's just this one individual, Kirkpatrick, I think you mentioned, on his own at the AARO, to what extent they are newbies in this whole field or behind the curve. In other words, will there be an opportunity for people like Robert Salas to do a little bit of hand-holding? In other words, okay, you think, what I said is fantastic, you should talk to this person and this person and this person.
Precisely. That's an extremely good point, because all of the people that I've spoken to that are sort of in the know, Robert Salas being one of them, and Daniel Sheehan and Steve Bassett, you name any researcher, and they'll tell you that most of the people that have been involved in this in this pursuit within the government right now, and how things have come forward since 2017, they are in fact newbies to all this stuff. There may be information that might have been handed down, but they may not have any kind of clarity on what it really might be, because this is a generational thing. Richard, you've got a whole bunch of people, within the intelligence community, within the defense community, who've known about this since back in the late 50s, and generationally, it's been taken over by people who are put into these positions. They keep the information secret. They hand the secrets down to the next generation. It's gone on and on and on since the 1950s when this all started. And now you've got a new generation of people within all of these agencies that are saying, my goodness, how much longer can we keep this information under a lid? And so these new people that are in all these agencies are probably newbies. Okay, they may not have access to all the information that they should have, and it's also been very, very compartmentalized. Okay, you pick any agency, they only know a sliver of what's going on, as opposed to the next sliver in another agency, another sliver in another. So it's been very, very carefully orchestrated in slivers in different agencies, so that not everybody knows all the information. So when you get to a point where someone can bring to bear an opening of all of the information and say, my goodness, we can no longer compartmentalize this stuff so carefully that it won't tell a full story. And that's what we need to do, is open the information up, tell the whole story about what's really going on here and how that information can be brought forward by people like Robert Salas, and hold the hands of people who are saying, we need help here. I mean, we really need some help here in finding out what the reality of some of these situations really, really are. And once that happens, and if it does happen in a very coherent way, I think the media will pick up on it and then hopefully run with it.
Do we know why Robert Salas, above and beyond everyone else, was picked? I don't know if he's the first, but it's it's a fairly newly minted department. Why was Robert Salas chosen?
Well, okay. There's a bit of I don't specifically. I don't know why he was chosen specifically, but Robert Salas has been the sort of the flagship witness of all of this. Okay, he first of all, there was no one else that I'm aware of that has made such a big deal. No one else has written books about it, first of all, okay, other than Robert Hastings. But he wasn't a witness. He just wrote books about it, about all the ICBM shutdowns. But Robert Salas was, in fact, there. And he's really the only one who's publicly come forward. He came forward at the 2013 citizen hearings in Washington, D.C., 2013, that Steve Bassett brought forward. He was the main witness about the ICBM shutdowns.
Press club in 2001, wasn't he? Was he there with Stephen Greer in 2001?
Yeah, that's right. He was there, Stephen Greer, 2001, and he made his first statement there. I think that's what really kicked the ball off for him. And then a number of years went by. Robert did interviews after that, and then he wrote Faded Giant and all the things that he did to bring things to light. And then I think it was in 2000 and what year was it? Where he had his own press conference in October of 2021, maybe, I forget the year, but he had his own press conference at the National Press Club with, I think, 5 or 6 of the launch commanders. And that's something that's not been done before. So I suppose Robert, being the sort of the leader of the sort of entourage of men wanting to bring this forward, and a lot of the guys that have done that experienced these things, I don't think they have the the drive, if I could use that word, that Robert has. Robert is totally compelled to get this information out. And I'm not quite sure that the other launch commanders are as compelled as Robert is. Now they'll talk about it, but I don't think they have the public mannerisms, the public chutzpah that you need to have to really come forward and really state your case in a very, very provocative way. Robert Salas does. So I think it's one of the reasons why he's been sort of chosen to, or at least approached to testify before this office. So I think that's the reason.
If you were putting together like the lineup for the next 2-3 witnesses you'd like to see testify before the AARO after Robert Salas, it's almost like putting together the 27 Yankees lineup. Who would they be? Who would hit second after Salas?
Well, as far as I think you'd have to sort of separate it into two categories: people who credible people who have in fact witnessed these things firsthand. I think Robert Salas would be. Let's separate it with witnesses. First of all, Robert Salas with all of these things that happened to him at Malmstrom Air Force Base, and then any one of the actual launch commanders. There's several of them that are still alive and they're still willing to testify. So any one of those would be excellent people to come forward as far as witnesses are concerned. With other aspects of UFO or UAP sightings, I really don't know if there's any other witnesses that you could actually bring forward to say, yes, I saw a UFO, fine, but that's not really that credible. These men actually witnessed not only a UFO doing something, but they also witnessed nuclear assets shut down. I mean, that is a big deal. That is a huge deal. And if enough of those kinds of witnesses come forward, that could be enough to turn the tables to say, listen, and have the media get a hold of this and make a big deal of it. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, in terms of witnesses, I would think that people like Richard Dolan would have to be number one on my list. And then you'd have to have someone like, Steve Bassett for sure. These kinds of researchers and advocates that have been around so long, historians and people who've, Steve is a Washington, what do you call him?
Lobbyist.
Lobbyist, exactly.
Registered lobbyist, yeah.
Registered lobbyist, yeah. People like that would have to be called forward and say, okay, what do you know? If they want, if this committee wants to dig deeper, they're going to have to call upon people who've been doing their homework over the last 50 or 60 years. And they've been around for so long. They've done such incredible work. The body of information that these researchers and advocates have collected is immense. Someone like Daniel Sheehan, for example. I mean, this man has done everything. He's been to the Vatican to ask for the Vatican about information about the UFO situation. He's spoken to everybody. So why Daniel Sheehan would not be a prime candidate along with Richard and Steve, I can't imagine him not being part of that witness testimony. And there may be others that are probably just as valuable, just as articulate, and just as credible as the three that I've mentioned. So if this office wants to really, really get down to doing something about knowing this information, they cannot depend on the newbies in their organization, and they cannot depend on the secret keepers, the real secret keepers in the dark, deep bowels of the dark black budget information secret keepers. They're not going to come forward. They're going to hold this information as tight as they can. And the only people that are going to be able to do it are people like Robert Salas and the other researchers that I mentioned, because there is a faction, Richard, within the United States government or beyond the United States government that knows exactly what's going on with respect to this issue. Okay. And they know it, and they don't want the information out. Now, what information? I mean, I can give you a synopsis of what I believe it is, but there is a faction within the United States government that does not want the granular, the hard nuts of this information to come forward. And that information is a clarity. It's a clarity to just about anybody who knows it within those deep factions, is the fact that we're not alone in the cosmos. Okay. And there are intelligent off-world civilizations visiting the planet and manifesting themselves that we don't understand, using energy sources that they want to keep hidden. Those are all a part of what this stuff might reveal that the deep secret keepers don't want to let loose. So you can talk about UFOs or UAP as long as you want, as long as you don't give them a name and a place and a description that will change the direction of the human family for the next 100 years, if not longer. And it all depends on energy and the fact that we can make clear that we're not alone in the cosmos, and these people are visiting our planet. That's what they don't want out. That's it in a nutshell. Forget about all the numbers that you can't. They don't want that information out there.
Well, it seems like there's a lot riding on the AARO,
Mm-hmm.
and that as Robert Salases and others, launch commanders and so forth, start to talk about, what they saw vis-a-vis
Mm-hmm.
UFO shutting down ICBMs, that's really going to totally eclipse the ODNI annual report, which, as you say, is just reporting on plastic bags and Chinese lanterns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the contrast of the mundane nature of this report and I'm trying to be as blunt as I can without being rude, the mundane nature of this report, the vexatious jargon that's used in it, and the contrast between that mundane characteristic of this report to the reality of what's really going on, it's just, the difference is so stark. It's just unbelievably stark. And the fact that this committee and all of the Pentagon officials and all the other agencies are afraid and incapable of, and I'm not sure what it is, of moving closer towards some sort of statement that, this might not be from here. But full well, they know that already. They're just afraid to admit it.
We just
So
have to make them say it.
That's right. You just have, exactly. So what this thing is basically, Richard, is just a way to, as you said earlier, it's just ragging the puck. It's just ragging the puck, and they'll do it for as long as they possibly can until the truth seekers actually get to a point where they can say, "We got you." And I think it's going to start, in my opinion, it's going to start with the things that Robert Salas could tell these committees or these organizations or these offices about publicly, something that they already know: the ICBM shutdowns. They've shut down 12 missiles, and we just don't know how they did it, and all the other things that it's done. Now, there may be other situations that that they may want to come forward with, and there may be, I mean, let's put it this way: what if, in fact, the United States government is withholding information that they have already met with extraterrestrials? Is that a possibility? Is that something that's so deeply secret that they're afraid of that getting out? And what are the implications of any government official or whatever meeting with extraterrestrials? What if, in fact, these extraterrestrials have, in fact, met with some of our elected officials, not just in the United States, maybe other places in the world? What if that is part of this reality? And I, for one who's been around this for 40 years, I am not going to doubt the fact that that might, in fact, be the case. I'm not sure of it, but I would not doubt that that could be part of this whole thing. Now, as I've said many, many times, when we get the full information, if we ever do, about this whole scenario, this whole phenomenon, it'll be totally different than what we expect. These beings could be interdimensional. We just don't know. But the fact of the matter, they're here. And how we go about separating the mundaneness of this report from the realities of what really might be occurring, underline the word "might be," because there's so many variations to what that might be. The essence of both of those things is so stark. You have to ask the question: why are they spending so much time obfuscating, confusing, and descending on information at this level of mundaneness, when they know the reality is so stark, is so real, and so interventionist into the human existence? So there's two stark realities here that we've got to deal with, and they might be moving closer together. They might be, because if you compare what's going on right now to where you and I started with all these discussions years and years ago, we are light years ahead in terms of, we really are. So will that progression continue to the point where the reality of this situation really comes to bear in fruition, with them admitting, okay, you're right, fine, they're not ours, they're from off-world civilizations, but, and then they go on with the rest of the scenario as to what the implications might be for the human family.
Well, to break it wide open, it may just take some journalist, maybe on a slow news day, although we don't have those anymore, once upon a time, at the Washington Examiner or the Washington Times or the Washington Post, decides, what, not much going on today. I'm going to take a look at this, what's going on today over at the AARO, and comes back to the office saying, he said what?
Exactly.
It might just blow the doors right off of all this.
It could, yeah. And, that's a really good point, because that's the way historical things happen, Richard. You and I have been around long enough to see things erupt in terms of, the Kennedy assassination and all of that involved, the Cuban Missile Crisis and what was all behind that, and then Watergate and all of these things. They erupt at a certain point in time when the pressure coming from wherever, be it media, be it from a whistleblower, from people, someone like John Dean, all of those. When that situation occurs, and it's going to occur again with this. I'm not sure who's going to do it or how it's going to happen, but these situations are part of the historical development of how information becomes uncovered. And because all information eventually does become uncovered at some point, I think, maybe there's things that are going on that haven't been, but it's just the nature of history, the nature of us as a species. Things cannot remain hidden forever. And I think this is one of those situations, because the proof, the evidence, the testimony is all so real. And in opposition to that, the measures, the orchestration of secrecy has been so intense. Why has the secrecy been so intense about this? Why has the denial, why has the silence been so intense? There must be a reason why it's being covered up and hidden for so long. And the pressure is going to keep on building to a point where they just can't hold back. So that's my kind of rant about that kind of situation.
Well, everyone, keep your eyes and ears on the AARO. I think this is about to get really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Victor, always a pleasure. Again, Zealand News Network. How do we find the press releases?
Zealand Communications .blogspot.com.
Thank you, my friend.
Okay. Great being with you, Richard.
You too.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.